Hey everyone, my name is Braden Abner, and my complex problem is the heroin epidemic in Southwest Ohio. Um, so opioids and heroin in specific have basically taken Southwest Ohio by hostage. There was a research group, and they conducted a study on 730 individuals living in Southwest Ohio, and 16% of those individuals reported that they had taken heroin at least once in the 30 days prior to the study. 730 isn't the biggest sample group by any means, but it gives us a general understanding of just how many people are actually using the drug. So those same participants rated the availability of heroin on a scale from 0 to 10 as a 10. 10 means that it's extremely easy to get, and 0 means that it's basically impossible to get. Not only is heroin easy to get, it's just extremely cheap in comparison to other drugs. The biggest part of the problem is that a lot of people are dying. There was 5,000 overdoses that led to deaths in Ohio last year, and 30% of those deaths involved heroin. Another big part of the problem is the mental health issues that are contributing to the epidemic. Many people turn to heroin after doctors stopped giving them their prescription opioids. Typically, those pills were being overprescribed, and as a result, people became addicted. Let's just say, you were given a bottle of pills that was supposed to last you for 2 weeks. You could come back 6 or 7 days later with an empty pill bottle and, give the doctors some excuse, and they would just refill your bottle, and they would continue to do so, over and over and over again. Those doctors, pharmacists, and clinics that were overprescribing the opioids are commonly referred to as pill mills. The manufacturers of those pills were well aware of the crisis they were creating, yet they continued to manufacture an unnecessary amount of them. Another thing that contributed to the problem we have today was just lack of public awareness. Many people were unaware of just how addictive opioids were, and by the time they realized, it was just way too late. Another thing that contributed was lack of intervention by the government and local law enforcement. Again, by the time the government intervened and began punishing the manufacturers of the pills and the pill mills that were distributing them, it was way too late. The crisis was already in full effect. So to continue on the origins, an overwhelming majority of heroin users struggle with their mental health. According to a study done by researchers, roughly 3/4 of heroin abusers in rural Southwest Ohio suffer from at least one mental health disorder. It's a small sample group again. It was about 100 people, but it gives us an idea. There's a wide variety of disorders that the participants suffered from, but there's about 5 that, showed up consistently. Those were depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, and PTSD. A lot of those disorders went untreated, sadly, but, addiction is hard for anybody to deal with, let alone people who suffer from mental health problems. So who's being affected by the problem? Basically everybody. But that, with that being said, there are a few demographics being affected more than others. Males are the overwhelming majority of users, and typically they age from 25 to 49, 50. The 3 main races that have the most users are Hispanics, Asians, and whites. Majority of users live within a quarter mile of a bus coverage area, so it gives them the opportunity to move around wherever they are in Southwest Ohio. A large number of users are in poverty. With that being said, there are some users that are living in houses upwards of $1 million. So that gives you guys an idea of, just how wide the range is. Many users are within 10 miles of a are within 10 miles of buprenorphine practitioners. And buprenorphine is basically, it's supposed to be a drug that like helps you like stop using heroin, but it's basically just like it's like a lesser heroin, if that makes sense. But one thing that's interesting that kind of goes back to the whole pill mill thing is that the largest group of users currently live within 10 miles of a pharmacy. So, that just goes to show how big of a, factor that these pharmacies are playing into the problem. And there's two like building zones in specific that have the most users, and those zones are commercial zones and downtown development zones. So how do we solve the problem? One way is to introduce drug monitoring programs in pharmacies. It's just a way for pharmacists to identify people who are showing signs of being a high-risk opioid abuser. One way they can do that is by checking their medical records, in the past 12 months. And one thing that they found among like opioid abusers is that they do something called doctor hopping. And it's basically, they just go from doctor to doctor to doctor to try and find one that will, continue to overprescribe them. And, if they can't find one, then typically they turn to heroin, and that's kind of what led us to where we are today. Another way to help solve the problem is to increase naloxone distribution. And naloxone is it's like a medicine that's supposed to revert overdoses. So it would help first responders and family members combat overdoses. Another way to solve the problem is to increase public awareness. People need to be educated, and especially family members of users, on how to help them combat the addiction. Recovery centers need to be more accessible. And when you have an addict in an environment around a bunch of other addicts, there's just no way for them to stop using. Users they need to get off the streets and get somewhere where they can actually get help. One big thing with recovery centers is that a lot of them are like really expensive. So I'm not exactly sure how they can do that, but they need to lower the costs a little. The last and final way I have that could solve the problem is increased intervention from law enforcement. They need to just cut it off at the root, and they need to arrest dealers and manufacturers of heroin, and they need to continue to crack down on pill mills. Over the past 10 years, there's been countless like pill mills, like doctors and pharmacists and clinics that have had their licenses revoked because they found them to be guilty of overprescribing stuff. This is my works cited.